Alhamdulillah, without any further ado, I would like to hand it over to Ustad Tayssir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sallam ajma'een. We begin by asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He purifies our intentions and our hearts and our souls, and He cleanses our hearts and prepare them to benefit from the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, from the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala count this gathering for us and not against us. May He have us learn from the way of the Prophet ﷺ in a manner that changes us internally and externally. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring us closer towards Him and closer towards His noble and His beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So I'm very grateful to be invited here to benefit from review and learning about the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. And I couldn't be happier that a conference is being put on where I get to attend and benefit from about the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, because the Prophet ﷺ, he is the pinnacle exemplar for all mankind, of every ethnicity, of every race, of every socio-economic class. There couldn't be a better example set for mankind. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose from creation mankind, and He chose from mankind certain people, and He made them prophets, and He chose from those prophets certain individuals, and He made them messengers, and He chose from those messengers 5, and He made them ulul azm min ar-rusul, and He chose from them our noble and beloved Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, who's the best of examples. In his life is the best of stories. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam did nothing in his sleep and in his wake except that we can benefit from it. Our teachers say, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them on our behalf, that any type of thing you want to do in your life, you can learn from the Prophet ﷺ how to do it. And as Sayyid Khurram was saying up here about the Prophet ﷺ, that his life has examples for us to live in our day, nothing more could be true. That everything he did, from as simple as to how he dressed, to as deep as how his heart was with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's the perfect example. And the people who know that are the people who study his life and they internalize his message and they act upon what they learn. And the people who don't do that, they might have false misgivings about him. And that is bad for them, but it's also bad for us as Muslims, because we're not communicating the message about who he was, alayhi afdal as-salatu was-salam. So Muslims might get angry that someone said something negative about Islam and about the Prophet ﷺ, and there's a place for fighting for social justice and a place for advocating on behalf of Muslims. But what's more important is that we do things like this, where we teach ourselves about the Prophet ﷺ, and equally important is that we teach non-Muslims about the Prophet ﷺ. If the only time they're hearing about the Prophet ﷺ from the Muslims is when somebody said something bad, and it's in response to that, this is not a good sign, right? We should be at the forefront of telling people about who the Prophet ﷺ is, and that would benefit us and that would benefit them. So I was asked by my friend Khurram to speak about reputation. And at first when he gave me the title, I thought, well, that's interesting that they chose that. But as I gave it some thought, it made a lot of sense. People are obsessed with how others view them. Particularly younger people, as they're growing up, they're trying to identify themselves with a group. And so they're very, very engaged about, what do my friends think about me? What do my classmates think about me? Even in college, people are trying to find their circle of friends. And even if they grow up, they're still concerned about that. And the Prophet ﷺ, he did have a reputation amongst Quraysh before he received revelation and after he received revelation. So we'll begin there, inshallah, and then we'll shift. The first story that I'd like to share with you, and I'd like to benefit from myself, is that the Prophet ﷺ, as a young man, was known for being courageous. He was known for being chivalrous. He was known for being intelligent. And for the young men in this room, and for the young women, there's a lot to learn in that. So for example, the Prophet ﷺ witnessed an incident that became known as the Treaty of Fudul, or the Agreement of Fudul. And some of the historians say that it happened in the 14th year of his life. So he was a young man, right? And the incident occurred that a man had come to Quraysh and he wanted to sell something. And then the person who bought that item from him ended up not paying him. He oppressed him. And when the man called out to Quraysh, he noticed that he didn't receive a lot of support. So some of the Arabs, this is pre-Islam, some of the Arabs got together and they made an agreement to help the oppressed against the oppressors. Right? And this was something that was ingrained in the Arabs. They did have a sense of wanting to help those in need. Right? And they saw that as protectors of Mecca and protectors of the Kaaba, they should be people that support those who need them. And the Prophet ﷺ, as a young man, was there. And he's narrated to have said that I swore allegiance to that, and if I was called to it again, that I would answer that call. Right? So this is an important incident, and why I'm sharing it with you is it shows you that the Prophet ﷺ, from very young, right? It's not that he was just courageous when he grew up. He was courageous from when he was young. And he was ready to sacrifice from when he was young. And he was so noble that he said, that agreement that I made when I was like basically 14, I would answer it if somebody called me to it today. Right? And this shows you the nobility of the Prophet ﷺ and his courage. And if you fast forward, just to tie this story in with what happens in the future, the Prophet ﷺ was the most courageous on the battlefield. The most courageous. People often don't understand, because they will hear that the Prophet ﷺ allowed people, for example, to harm his person, and he did. And that there's courage in that as well, right? So for example, the Prophet ﷺ, particularly after Abu Talib dies, and after Sayyidatuna Khadija dies, it was known that they would physically assault him and accost him. For example, he would be praying Ali afdal salatu wassalam in the Kaaba or in front of the Haram, and it wouldn't be shocking, and it occurred that Abu Jahl or others would encourage some of the disbelievers to physically accost him. In one story, they poured the entrails of an animal upon his blessed body as he was making sujood, right? And the Prophet ﷺ didn't strike back because he wasn't given permission by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to strike them. And it wasn't his demeanor to do that when he was physically harmed. But look, I'm going to tie it into the other story. If someone else was harmed, the Prophet ﷺ was the most courageous. Look at the difference, the nuanced difference. Because what happens is people on both sides of arguments, they'll take his story and they'll misuse it and they'll abuse it. So some people will say, if somebody harms me, I'm gonna run him to the wall, right? Because the Prophet ﷺ was courageous. Well, he was courageous, but not when he was harmed, right? When other people were harmed. And then other people will say, oh yeah, I know so-and-so person is being oppressed, but the Prophet ﷺ used to forgive. Yeah, but when it was he that was being harmed, when someone else is being harmed, it's not courageous to just let it happen, right? So the Prophet ﷺ was approached once by a man, and the story actually went that a man was oppressed by Abu Jahl, and he was not given his due, meaning he was owed money by Abu Jahl, and Abu Jahl didn't pay it. And so this man came to some of the disbelievers, and he said, look, Abu Jahl won't give me my money. Abu Hakam won't give me my money. Can you help me? And so they were like laughing at this man because he was a poor man. And they said to him, you know who can help you? Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, can help you. And they knew that the Prophet ﷺ had this issue with Abu Jahl. Abu Jahl had this issue with him. And they thought it was like a joke. Like he would go tell the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ is not going to be able to exact any money from him. This was their opinion. And that Abu Jahl wouldn't respond favorably even if he did. And so when it came to the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ said, oh, I'll go with you. And he knocked on the door of Abu Jahl and he said, I heard that you owe this man money, you give him his money. And Abu Jahl went and he took the money and gave it to him right away. And later, the disbelievers who had told the man to seek out the Prophet ﷺ, they said, you humiliated us. We thought that this was going to turn out bad for Muhammad, and then you gave him the money. How could you do that? And he said, you don't understand. When the Prophet ﷺ knocked on the door, it was like there was like a beast behind him and he was going to eat me. In other words, the Prophet ﷺ was so courageous that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought him such haiba, such reverence, that he would definitely seek out justice for those who were oppressed. Right? And that's how the Prophet ﷺ always was. So we can learn from this story, for example, that as young men and young women and older men, because I know some of the people here are family members, they're parents, they're in college, they're beyond. All of us can benefit from this, not just young people. That when it comes to our own rights, the better thing to do, you don't have to, but the better thing to do is to let people go. Now, if they're abusing you, that's different. You shouldn't allow somebody to continuously abuse you. You should remove yourself from that scenario. However, if somebody says something wrong about you once, if somebody does this, it's better to let them go. But if somebody is harming someone else, and you have the ability to help in that scenario, you should, as the Prophet ﷺ has outlined. So that's one story that I wanted to share with you. Another story that I wanted to share with you that's more well known about the reputation of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is that the Prophet ﷺ was known as a Sadiq al-Amin. In year 35 of the Prophet ﷺ's life, in year 35 of his life, an issue happened, and some of the historians and the seerah scholars say that the Kaaba had begun to fall apart, and even some of its foundations had shook because of a flood. And there's differences of opinion of what happened. Regardless, they decided they would rebuild it. And so they were rebuilding the Kaaba, and there were different groups taking part. And each of them was doing from a side. And then they got to the part where they had to put the black stone, which was holy to them as well, back into its place. And a disagreement occurred. It got so bad, as they say in English, that it almost came to blows. In other words, they were literally going to fight in front of the Kaaba. And so they made an agreement. They decided not to fight. And they said, look, the next man that walks through this door, right, through this gateway, we'll allow him to judge between us. Okay? So they came to the Prophet Muhammad the Prophet was the one who came through the door. And the second that they saw him, they said, oh, it's a Sadiq al-Amin, a Sadiq al-Amin, a Sadiq al-Amin. Right? In other words, this is the trustworthy one. Of course we'll give him and let him choose. And so we see, and they're reaching out to him and they're calling him of that name, that he already had this as an attribute amongst them, right? Because that was immediately their response. Sadiq means trustworthy, or you could say Sadiq is honest, and Amin is trustworthy, right? In other words, he was already known, his reputation amongst his people already from before Islam came was he was honest and he was trustworthy. He wouldn't lie, right? Now, I want you to zoom forward. The Prophet ﷺ at Badr, okay? At Badr, right before they enter into a battle, Abu Jahl, again, the arch nemesis. The Prophet ﷺ called him my Pharaoh, right? Abu Jahl was in his tent, and a Bedouin came to Abu Jahl, and he said to him while he was in his tent before the battle, he said, Ya Abu al-Hakam, swear by Allah, this man Muhammad, what he came with, is he telling the truth? And the man tells us that Abu Jahl actually looked left and he looked right. He said, look, you're making me swear by Allah and there's no one here but you. So I'm going to tell you the truth. He said he didn't lie about things in this earth. You think he's going to lie about what comes from the heavens? So Abu Jahl knew this, right? He already accepted this. He already embraced this fact. He wasn't denying it, right? Now, the man says to Abu Jahl, then why are you here trying to kill him? And you're here to fight him. And look what he says. He says, well, his clan and my clan we're competing for prominence. And now one of them's a prophet. How are we ever going to match that? Right? And actually the ulama say that type of kufr, because that's kufr, right? That type of kufr, that type of disbelief is very rampant, right? Which is, it's not that you reject Allah, but it's that you reject the prophet sent to you by Allah because you view yourself as better than them. Right? But notice, the reason I'm telling this story is that the honesty of the man who walked in at age 35, the Prophet ﷺ, he was already known for that. Even at the day of Badr, it was already known and it was already crystallized, even as someone who was as big of an enemy as Abu Jahl to the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. At this story of the Kaaba, the Prophet ﷺ was very wise. He wasn't just trustworthy and honest and fair. He decided that they would put out a cloak, and he would put the black stone in the middle of the cloak, and all 4 representatives from the different families would carry it over, and then he would place it into the Kaaba, and they agreed to that, and they were happy with his decision. Alayhi afdal as-salat was-salam. Another story that I wanted to share with you, and that I think is very relevant, and it teaches us about the Prophet ﷺ reputation, and then I want to take a detour. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ, forgive me, I feel like I'm not maybe speaking into this. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when he entered into Mecca in that year of Fatih Mecca, which was year 8 of the Hijrah. When he entered into Fatih Mecca, there's so many stories we can learn from it. But I want to pick one story because it has to do with his reputation. And then we want to tie it back into your lives. The Prophet ﷺ, when he entered into Mecca, the first thing he did is he entered into the Kaaba, he destroyed the idols, he prayed, and then he came out and basically he hung from the door of the Kaaba. This is a well-known story that some of the most prominent and many of the Arabs had gathered around the Kaaba. Now you have to understand, these people had harmed the Prophet ﷺ in the worst possible ways. If you think you have an enemy, you do not have an enemy the way the Prophet ﷺ had an enemy. They were trying to wipe his religion off the face of the map. They had attempted to kill him multiple times. They had besieged his city. They had slaughtered his friends and his family. They had mutilated the bodies of his companions. They had said horrible things about him. They had stolen his property and the property of his friends. They had went back on multiple treaties. They had insulted him. Right? Literally as bad as it can get. You and I, even though I'm sure many of you in this room have had tough lives, no one is free from some difficulty, it's not comparable. The Prophet ﷺ said, no one was harmed on behalf of this religion as much as I was. Right? And that's a true statement because he's a Sadiq al-Amin or Sadiq al-Masduq. So when he hung from the door, and this is a well-known statement, but I wanted to share it with you because I think it's important. He said to them, and I'll narrate right from the book because it's a hadith and I don't want to get any words of it wrong. He said to them, Ya ma'ashara Quraysh, O people of Quraysh, ma tarawna anni fa'ilun fikum. He said, O people of Quraysh, what do you think? What do you see that I'm going to do with you? Okay. So anybody who knows anything about the world until very recently, the normal interaction between a conqueror and the people that he conquers is total vanquish. Right? They will take generally the leaders and they'll execute them or they'll enslave them. Right? They'll remove the people in power and put them to the lowest of lows, and then they'll take the people who they want to support and they'll bolster them. Right? We can see that in even modern day context, which we won't ruin our gathering with. So he says to them, what do you think I'm going to do with you? Right? And then they said, قَالُوا خَيْرًا. They said, good. You're going to do good to us. أَخٌ كَرِيمٌ وَابْنُ أَخٍ كَرِيمٌ. You're a noble brother and the son of a noble brother. So notice that their immediate reaction wasn't even fear of him. They weren't afraid of him. Even though after everything they had done and his entering into this town, you would think that they would be, in English, shaking in their boots. Right? But they weren't. And how does that tie to reputation? That's because they knew that the Prophet ﷺ was not going to harm people unfairly. The Prophet ﷺ wasn't going to harm people even though they had harmed him. Right? And he wanted good for them. So what does he say in response to them? He says, اذهبوا فأنتم الطلقاء. Go. In other words, you're free and I've released you. Or you have been the ones who are released. And then the narrator says that they left the Kaaba and they left the Haram like people who had been dead and had been revived from their graves. Right? So there's a lot about reputation in this short passage that I wanted to share with you. One is that the Prophet ﷺ, even while being an enemy to these people, and these people being an enemy to them, they never saw from him except good. Never. Right? I'll share with you a similar story. One time, some of the companions, they were going out and they were traveling, and they stopped at a Bedouin tenting area, and they asked the people to give them hospitality, to take care of them. This is a desert, and the people refused, even though in Arab culture that's really insulting. And so they said, okay, you're not going to let us, we're going to stay out here. That very night, a snake bit the chief of the Bedouins. So they didn't know what to do. So then one of them said, go out to the Muslims. We hear that their prophet didn't come except with what is good. Right? So there was already, even though they rejected their hospitality, they didn't give them hospitality, they had already heard good about him. And this is important because one, you learn from the story of the Prophet ﷺ that his reputation always preceded him, which is obvious. But also that just because the reputation preceded him didn't mean that people accepted the message. In fact, often they didn't. But it allowed for, in certain scenarios, for people to embrace him and for people to trust him. And a question comes up, and I'm sure this is one of the reasons that this topic was chosen, is that how are we and what is our reputation with both internally with Muslims and with non-Muslims, right? So like one of the worst possible scenarios is that our reputation is, we sell things that we shouldn't sell. Unfortunately, that's a huge reputation of Muslims in America, right? They sell products that are prohibited to non-Muslims, prohibited in our religion, right? Unfortunately, that our reputation there precedes us as a community, which is not just insulting, it's downright despicable for us as a community, right? I joke, and by joke I mean cry at, that one of the only things that Muslims have presented to the greater American community is things to smoke, right? Hookah bars and the like, right? You go anywhere in Southeast Michigan and it's run by Muslims, right? These are things, our reputation is the opposite of what it should precede us, right? Thankfully, this community and others has noble people, physicians, and it has engineers that are doing good, right? But we have to ask ourselves, how are our dealings with one another? Most people that enter into Islam, in my experience, and the experience of many people working it out, is through good character with one another. And people said that about the Prophet ﷺ. They said everything from the way he looked, this is not the face of a liar, alayhi afdalus salatu wassalam, to the way that he treated them, right? To the way that he responded to how they got ignorant with him. And so as I make the shift here, and I think it's important that I'm telling you I'm making a shift because there's a reason for it. I do think it's important that we think about what people think about us as friends, as communities. And that's a part of religion. We should be worried. We should be thinking about how are we carrying ourselves. So as young boys, as young women, as elders, men and women, that should be part of our calculus. But more important, and that's where the shift occurs, more important than what they think about us is what does Allah think about us. Right? So it's not just our reputation with each other or with the greater non-Muslim community. What about the reputation in the heavens? What about the reputation in the heavens? That should strike way more fear into us and cause us to want to do good than what other people think about us. And what I would say to the parents as we kind of talk about this a little bit more in depth is much more than instilling in your child, or as you as a young person, much more than being instilled in fearing what the community will say, beta, what will the uncle say, what will the auntie say, what will the imam say. That's important. It's part of our calculus as a community. More important is what would Allah say? What would the Sahaba, if they found out, say? What would the angels say? Right? Much more important than what the community would say. Because sometimes the community is wrong. Right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always tells the truth. And they call this, brothers and sisters in faith, they call this fearing what Allah thinks of us. They call this ihsan. And it's really the pinnacle of this religion. In the hadith of Sayyidina Jibreel, alayhi as-salam, wa ala nabiyyina afdal as-salah was-salam, he's asked, what is Islam, what is Iman, what is Ihsan, and how does he define Ihsan? أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. To worship Allah as though you see Him, and if you don't see Him, know that He sees you. So the ulama say that the second half of that definition, because there's two parts. To worship Allah as though you see Him, that's part one of Ihsan. And almost like a lower stage of it is that if you don't see Him, then know what? That He sees you. And they call this the station of mindfulness, or the station of ikhlas, or they call it the station of muraqabah. They have different words for it. That, okay, if you can't at least be always aware that Allah sees you, then you should know that what? If you can't worship as though you see Allah, then know what? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always sees you. And that you should be ashamed of that. So I want to share with you some hadith of the Prophet ﷺ about that, and about our reputation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said in one hadith, this hadith particularly, his chain is not as strong. The Sahabi said, Awsani Khalili. Look how they talk about the Prophet ﷺ. He said, my close intimate friend advised me. He's talking about the Prophet ﷺ. He said, An akhsha Allah ka'anni ara. فَإِن لَمْ أَكُنْ أَرَى فَإِنَّهُ يَرَانِي. He says, my close intimate friend, meaning the Prophet ﷺ, advised me to fear Allah. And if that I don't fear Allah, he advised me that I fear Allah as though I see Him. And if I don't see Him, that I should know that He sees me. And another hadith that has a stronger chain, the companion said, أَخَذَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمْ بِبَعْضِ جَسَدِي فَقَالَ عَبُدُ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ. He said, he took me, the Messenger of Allah took me by part of my body. And he said to me, worship Allah as though you see Him. And then the Prophet ﷺ was approached once by a man. And he said, O Messenger of Allah, give me advice that's short, to the point. Right? He said, give me advice that's short and to the point. And the Prophet ﷺ said in a famous hadith that's often narrated, part of it, he said, Salli salata muwaddi'in. Pray the prayer of someone bidding farewell. فَإِنَّكَ إِن كُنْتَ لَا تَرَاهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ. Pray the prayer of someone who's leaving this world, because even if you don't see him, guess what? He sees you. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the Prophet ﷺ says in the hadith of Abu Umama, he said that a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked him for advice. And the Prophet ﷺ says, Istahi min Allah istihya'ak min rajulayn min salihai ashiratik la yufariqanik. He said, be modest, be shy of Allah, the shyness you would have of two men who were pious from your tribe that never left your side. Right? So how does this tie into your reputation? Of course it ties in. Because reputation, if we're only talking about people, there are times when the people are not around. So what does that mean? During that time it's okay, you can do whatever you want? No, of course not. The Prophet ﷺ was asked about, maybe not dressing completely when people were not around. So everyone knows there's an awrah, you have to cover it. What about when people are not around? He was asked about uncovering the awrah when you were alone, and he said to them, Allah ahaq an yustahya min. Allah is more deserving of people being shy, meaning than people. You should be more shy of Allah than you are of other people. Right? The Prophet ﷺ. So what we learn from this, brothers and sisters in faith, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, is that our real reputation that we should be concerned about is our reputation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the people, that's one level. But much more important than the people is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Much more than the people is the Prophet ﷺ, who's given reports about what we're doing. He's given reports about what we're doing. Or our deceased family members who are given reports about what we're doing. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in which he says that a report is given about a report is given to your deceased, right, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he said, so don't harm the dead. So what's the connection between don't harm the dead and a report is given about what you've done? That means if you've done bad, then they're going to hear the bad that you've done, and that's going to what? That's going to harm them. Right? So these types of things should affect us. Now, since my time's running short, I want to share with you some advice. Okay, some advice about how to build a good reputation, and some advice about how to build a good reputation with others and with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the first thing that the ulama mentioned, they mentioned that if you find yourself lazy, you find yourself unable to do what Allah obligated, or you find yourself desiring to do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited, the first thing that you should do is you need to speak to yourself. And I know it's kind of silly to think that you talk to yourself. I'm sure many of you do talk to yourselves because it's a normal thing that people do. But for those of you who don't, it's okay. Talk to yourself during this occasion. There's nothing wrong with it. And tell yourself in private, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can see me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees what I'm doing in private and in public. So that's the first step. The first step, if you feel like you're going to do something that's going to break your reputation, is you should tell yourself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees what I'm doing. There isn't three that gather to speak intimately about something except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there for it. There isn't four who gather, the Quran says, about to speak privately about something except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is fifth. About Sayyidina Muhammad alayhi salatu and Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu when they're in the cave, right, and they're fleeing to Medina. He says, what do you say about two people and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there for them? Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always there. He's closer to you than your carotid artery. That should cause us to shake if we were being honest with ourselves. Okay, reality check. Most of us, we know this, but we can't. It hasn't impacted us enough that it affects us day to day. Right? So what do? So the ulama say there's another key, there's another tool that will help you. And that is that remember that there are angels on your right and on your left that are seeing everything that you're doing. At least those two angels. There's other angels, but at least those two. And we should have a relationship with our angels. In other words, we should do good things so that they can write only good. Right? So if we're not ashamed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or maybe we can't bring that to mind enough, then maybe we should remind ourselves like, wow, am I really going to do this prohibited thing with the angels sitting right here watching everything that I'm doing? Am I really going to break etiquette and say something that I shouldn't say? And the angel's going to hear all of this, and he's going to write this down. That's another tactic that's useful. Another tactic that they say, what if that's not enough? It's not enough. Maybe a person, angels, they believe in angels, but it's difficult for them to remember. Well, there's another tool that they give you, which is that you remember death. If you want to have a good reputation, you want something to encourage you to do good and to shape up, remember death. The Prophet ﷺ, he said to remember the destroyer of pleasures. And brothers and sisters in faith, one of the strongest things to help you overcome something that you want to do that's not allowed, or to encourage you to do something that you're being lazy to do, is to remember that one day you will die. Because if you knew that this was your last day, you wouldn't leave the mosque. Right? You would pray, you would read Quran, you're trying to rack up as many good deeds as possible. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith that you just heard, pray the prayer of someone what? Bidding farewell. Right? Because you don't know when you're going to bid farewell. So if remembering that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees you is not enough, if remembering that the angels see you is not enough, then perhaps what is enough is that you remember that one day you're going to be in the grave. Right? And some of the ulama, and I'm not encouraging you to do this because this may be a little bit extreme for our time, although there's a time and place for everything, they would create their own graves in their homes. And they would lie down in it once a day, for example. And they would say, one day you're going to be in this small hole. To remind themselves. They say, Sayyidina Rabi'ah, that she used to do khatmas in her grave. She would read Quran in her grave. to invest in something that's worthwhile. Real investment, real 401k or whatever it's called, right? To invest in her next life. Okay, what if that's not enough? You know what? In America, we don't like to talk about death. It's morbid. So are there any other tools that you have for us? Yes, there are other tools that we have. Alhamdulillah, the ulama taught us many things from the Prophet ﷺ. So the next piece of advice that they give is that you remember the punishment of the hellfire. Right? Next time you're going to do something that breaks etiquette, next time you're going to do something that's going to get you a bad reputation with the heavens, remember that there will be a day in which everything that you did, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take you to task for it. They'll say, as you probably recited for Surah Al-Kahf, the translation of the meaning of which was, what is this book? Nothing small or large is left out of it. Everything's in it. Right? So to remember that the person who backbit receives this type of punishment. The person who steals receives this type of punishment. So it's not just bad that people will think poorly of you, there's an actual punishment for it. Right? It might seem cool in this life, but in the next life there's eternal punishment. Right? So these are things that should put a fire under us. You know what? In America, we don't like to talk about fire and brimstone. That's not going to work for me. Do you have anything else that will work for me? Yeah, there are other things that work too. The ulama mentioned, okay, if the fire is not enough to scare you, perhaps a carrot strategy will work. To tell yourself, don't you want to be among the people who are receiving bliss in the next life? Don't you want to be with the people of heaven? Right? So that's another tool that you can use if the other tools don't work. You could tell yourself, I want to be with the people who enter into heaven. I want to be with the people in bliss. I want to be with the people who are with the Prophet ﷺ. And that's an encouragement. Right? It's an encouragement. You want to receive some type of reward. It's definitely better than being of the people who are burning in the hellfire. Right? I don't want to be amongst those people, the people on that day that their faces are darkened, the people who they're humiliated on that day, the people who are subdued and subjugated on that day. I want to be with the good people. I want to be amongst the believers. I want to be amongst the Muslims. So that's another form of encouragement. And then the last form that they mentioned, and it's funny because that's how we started. We started the lecture with the last form. It just shows you the condition that we are in as humankind, is that you think about someone pious from your community. What would he or she say if you did that thing in front of them? And that's the lowest form of caring, right? Because you're worrying more about what people would think about you than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would think about you. So Imam al-Ghazali, for example, says, he said, in prayer, if you want to concentrate, remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees you. And he said, if that's not enough, then remember that the angels are writing down what you're doing. If that's not enough, remember the punishment that awaits you if you don't get right. If that's not enough, remember the reward. He said, if that's not enough, imagine a really pious person standing in front of you. How would you pray? Wouldn't your prayer change? And he said, and if it does change, be ashamed in front of Allah that you're more worried about this man than you are about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, if that's not enough, I don't have anything for you. He said, I don't have anything for you with that. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, he said, of the prophecy of old that lasts till our day. It's a tough phrase to translate, right? He says is that if you have no shyness, then do what you will. If you're not shy of what people think about you, then do what you will. And it's one of the difficulties of our era and where we live. Because there's a promoted culture of like, who cares what people think about me? Right? And I'll agree with that if what you mean is that you stand up for truth. If what you mean about that is that you'll go against the grain. If what you mean by that is that you're going to stand up for your religion. If that's what you mean, then great. But if what you mean is, I don't care what Allah thinks. I don't care what the Sharia says. I don't care what the Prophet ﷺ says, then that's awfully problematic. Right? For all of the things that we mentioned. Brothers and sisters in faith, the seerah of our Prophet ﷺ teaches us not just about reputation with people, but about reputation with Allah. Right? He's the praised one. That's literally what his name means. It means the one who has so many praiseworthy traits that he's constantly being praised. Muhammad, alayhi afdal as-salatu was-salam. That's why they didn't want to use his name. Because they said, we don't want to use his name. Even when we say his name, it's like we're praising him. So they called him what? They called him Mudammama, the blameworthy one. And the Prophet ﷺ said about them, he said, they keep criticizing this one named Mudammam. I don't know what they're talking about. My name is what? Muhammad. So they weren't, even their attacks against him didn't stick. Right? Alayhi afdal as-salatu was-salam. Right? And they couldn't deny that he was the best of character. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala witnesses his character. He said, indeed you are a lofty character. Alayhi afdal as-salatu was-salam. So what I would leave you with, before we take questions inshallah, what I would leave you with, because 8:30 was what was supposed to end, what I would leave you with is to learn about the Prophet alayhi salatu was-salam's life. I talked a lot, and a lot of it was theory, and for the younger folk in this room, it might be a little bit over their heads, and I apologize for that. I would tell you, learn about him, and then you'll know how you're supposed to act. Learn about Sayyidina Fatima, you'll know how you're supposed to act. Learn about Sayyidina Abu Bakr, you'll know how you're supposed to act. Learn about Sayyidina Umar, you'll know how you're supposed to. Look at the top of that mountain and see the best of them, and then you'll know how you're supposed to act. But brothers and sisters in faith, if we make our emulation towards artists, or towards athletes, or towards people in the media, and it's not the Prophet ﷺ and his Sahaba, then we're going to head in a different direction, and we're going to have a different set of reputation as a community, as individuals, as families. So what I would advise the parents is that they instill in their children care about the reputation with Allah. Because you know what? Young people, naturally, they'll say, I don't care what they say. They're being hypocrites anyway, right? And so what they won't say if they have faith is, I don't care what Allah says, right? No one with faith will say that, right? And so make sure that you distinguish that when it comes to prayer, when it comes to the Sharia, when it comes to what's obligatory and what's prohibited, it's Allah that we care about. It's Allah and what He told us to do. And then the rest of this, what the people think, it plays a part in our societies. It does. It plays a part. But we need to instill in our children caring what Allah thinks of us. And for the young people, particularly those who snickered maybe a little bit, saying like, oh yeah, you're right, Mom and Dad, see, didn't hear what he said? Well, what your parents are telling you to do still stands. We're just telling you that you should be even more fearful, because it's not about what the people think, it's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala thinks. Right? And as a community, as I'll re-emphasize my advice, that we really need to think about our reputation with the world at large. Right? What is our reputation, brothers and sisters in faith? And how does one gain good reputation? Does he gain good reputation by doing what everyone else does? Does he gain reputation by following the world the way everyone else does? No. The Prophet ﷺ said, let go of this world, be indifferent to this world, and Allah will love you. Be indifferent to what is in the hands of men, and the people will love you. Right? Meaning, if you're willing to give up wealth, if you're willing to give up power and prestige, if you're willing not to chase people for worldly things, people will love you. Because generally all people care about are those things. Right? If you want to have a good reputation with the people, give up what everyone else is chasing and be beneficial to them. Be beneficial to them. And I think our community is at that stage where we really need to think about these things. A lot of times people will say, oh, we need to be like the Jews, or no, what we need to be is like the Muslims. Not the Muslims currently. We need to be like the first Muslims. That's what we need to be like. Right? People, the Prophet ﷺ described the believers that are like rain. Wherever they fall, they benefit. Wherever they fall, they benefit. Right? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala change the course of this ummah to a course that He's pleased with. May He make us pleased with whatever He's decreed for us in this life and in the next. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us and bring us closer towards Him. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sallam.